Have you ever sat down to enjoy a classic Western and found yourself captivated by the Stagecoach? Hollywood gives us a vision full of excitement and adventure, heroic figures, a dash of romance, and sweeping scenic landscapes. Think John Wayne in Stagecoach, guiding a mismatched band of travelers through danger and transformation. But what if I told you that Hollywood's version of the Stagecoach is mostly make-believe? The truth was far from those thrilling, sometimes cozy-looking movie rides.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the silver screen fantasy to reveal the harsh, grueling, and often perilous reality of 19th century stagecoach travel. We'll dive into what passengers actually experienced. You'll uncover a world filled with exhaustion, discomfort, and dangers that went well beyond a gunslinging ambush. By the end of this video, you'll have a whole new respect for what people really went through, and why the true story of the Stagecoach is even more gripping than the legend. And if you're passionate about real Old West history and want more deep dives into the gritty past, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you're ready for the next ride into history. Chapter 1. Hollywood's frontier fantasy versus the cruel conveyance. When we picture stagecoaches, scenes from films like John Ford's Stagecoach often come to mind. We imagine colorful characters thrust together on a shared journey. The coach itself appears roomy enough for conversation, plot twists, and emotional tension. These movie adventures promise excitement, high-speed chases, bold robberies, or selfless heroics. The Stagecoach becomes a moving theater of human conflict and connection. But what these films rarely show is the ongoing hardship that defined real 19th century stagecoach travel. Hollywood loves sudden ambushes but tends to ignore the day-in, day-out agony, terrible road conditions, punishing discomfort, ever-present grime, and the looming threats of illness and serious injury. This romantic portrayal of stagecoach life fed into the myth of a bold, youthful America, transforming a grueling tool of expansion into a symbol of gritty determination. In truth, the experience was something most people today would find nearly unendurable. Chapter 2. The Concord Discomfort. The Concord coach, built for durability rather than comfort, is the most iconic of all stagecoaches. First developed in the 1820s, its creator set out to design a stylish yet functional vehicle. Its standout feature was a leather thorough-brace suspension system, which allowed the coach to swing slightly, softening the ride compared to older wagons, at least on the relatively smoother roads back east. The design was so solid, it remained largely unchanged for nearly 75 years. But comfort was a very relative term, especially when traveling over the rugged trails of the American West. Concord coaches were designed to carry 6, 9, or even 12 passengers inside, but they often squeezed in more, with additional riders perched on top or hanging onto the sides. Inside, the space was shockingly tight, just over 4 feet wide and around 4.5 feet tall. Travelers were jammed in shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Mark Twain once wrote that the ride often jumbled passengers into a heap at the front, or left them practically standing on their heads. The leather thorough braces, though a technical step forward, were far from a perfect solution. Mark Twain described one snapping under the weight of overloaded mailbags. Another traveler recalled being tossed from the hard seat to the roof, then slammed against the side. Hardly a laughing matter. Stagecoaches in the West abandoned glass windows in favor of roll-down leather or canvas flaps, since the relentless shaking would simply shatter the glass. This left passengers exposed to dust, rain, and harsh weather. Mail, often the main cargo, was frequently stacked high inside, cutting into what little space there was. The Concord coach ultimately depended on the sheer endurance of those brave enough to ride it. Chapter 3. Are we there yet? The brutal truth of the ride itself. That idyllic image of a stagecoach drifting through scenic landscapes quickly crumbles when faced with the reality of the journey. The main villain, the dreadful condition of 19th century roads, which turned every mile into a test of endurance. Roads in the West were often nothing more than rough dirt tracks, vulnerable to the elements, riddled with ruts, caked in mud, choked with dust, or buried under heavy snow. One particularly dreaded variety was the corduroy road. Logs laid side by side across swampy terrain. Charles Dickens once described traveling on one as delivering jolts severe enough to dislocate every bone in the body. Progress was painfully slow, typically just 5 to 12 miles per hour, and sometimes as little as 7 to 12 miles in an entire day. A trip that takes a few hours by car today might have required 3 exhausting days by stagecoach. This meant constant jarring motion, leading to fatigue and bruising. Overcrowding only made it worse. Passengers were packed tightly inside the cramped coach, while mailbags often became airborne hazards.
There was virtually no escape from the brutal elements: sweltering heat, choking dust, biting cold, driving rain, and endless swarms of insects. Long-haul stagecoach travel was unrelenting, continuing both day and night, sometimes for up to 22 days straight. The grueling trip from St. Louis to San Francisco, for example, lasted around 25 days, offering minimal food and no real rest. Stops were short, mostly just to swap out horses. In some cases, passengers had to get out and walk to ease the load on tired animals, or even help push the coach uphill. The entire experience was a relentless, full-body assault that wore down travelers both physically and mentally. Chapter 4. Surviving the Stops. Way stations and refreshments. Brief stops at way stations offered minimal, true relief. These stations primarily existed to swap out exhausted horses. Larger, quote, home stations were usually private homes or modest inns that served meals and provided bare-bones lodging. Even so, any pause was fleeting. Butterfield overland mail coaches, for example, often halted for only 10 minutes. The quality of food at these stops was a frequent complaint. Taverns took advantage of the captive clientele, charging high prices for subpar meals. Granville Stewart grumbled that every meal seemed identical. Typical dishes included greasy bacon, salted ham, and the infamous dried apple pie. More thrifty travelers sometimes brought their own supplies to avoid the offerings. Sanitation was another major issue. Many travelers were horrified by the filthy conditions, especially those from Victorian backgrounds who were taken aback by the casual disregard for hygiene. One driver recalled a station cook who stroked the resident animals before plunging her unwashed hands straight into biscuit dough. When a disgusted passenger objected to the filth, the innkeeper famously replied, "Everyone should eat a peck of dirt." The traveler deadpanned that he preferred not to consume his entire share in one sitting. Lodgings were primitive at best. Women were usually packed into a single room, while men were expected to bunk 2 to a bed, or even 3 or 4, regardless of familiarity. These overnight stops often became just another chapter in the grueling saga of stagecoach travel. Chapter 5. The Unspoken Horrors. Sanitation and sickness on the trail. Beyond the visible hardships lay even more distressing realities: basic bodily needs and the ever-present threat of illness. There were no toilets aboard a stagecoach. When nature called, passengers had to make do with roadside stops, where privacy was nearly non-existent. Maintaining any kind of personal cleanliness was virtually impossible. Facilities at way stations were crude at best. Washing up meant using a horse trough shared by all, complete with a communal drinking cup, towel, and even toothbrush. Passengers typically traveled in a state of grimy neglect. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were routine companions, especially after sharing beds with unwashed strangers who may not have bathed in months. But the most deadly consequence of these conditions was the rampant spread of disease. On the overland trails, the leading cause of death wasn't violence, it was sickness. In fact, 9 out of 10 pioneer deaths were due to illness. Cholera, the silent killer, spread through contaminated water and could take a life within 24 hours through rapid dehydration. Dysentery brought bloody diarrhea and fever. Typhoid fever, tuberculosis, measles, influenza, and mountain fever were also common afflictions. Cramped stagecoaches and filthy stations were perfect breeding grounds for these illnesses. Access to proper medical care was rare to non-existent, and most travelers relied on ineffective home remedies. At the time, germ theory was barely understood. Many still blamed disease on miasmas or bad air rather than bacteria or viruses. Chapter 6. The Real Perils of the Prairie, Beyond Hollywood's Gunfights. While Hollywood loves to focus on shootouts and dramatic duels, the most frequent and often deadliest threats came from far more mundane sources: accidents, breakdowns, and robbery. Mishaps were alarmingly common. Wheels could come off, horses might bolt out of control, or brakes might fail entirely. Stagecoaches routinely broke down, stranding their passengers. Causes range from treacherous roads and faulty mechanics, such as snapped axles or collapsed wheels, to human error, like reckless or drunk driving, unruly horses, and risky river crossings over unstable bridges. One of the biggest dangers was overturning. With their tall, top-heavy design, coaches were highly prone to tipping, often resulting in serious injury or death. Stagecoach robbery was also widespread. Between 1870 and 1884 alone, Wells Fargo stagecoaches were hit nearly 350 times. Bandits typically struck at slow, vulnerable points in the journey. Violence levels varied. Some robbers avoided bloodshed, while others were more brutal. The usual targets were treasure boxes and mail sacks. Some, like the infamous Black Bart, were surprisingly civil, while others were crude and merciless. To counter the threat, stage lines employed armed shotgun messengers, and when carrying high-value cargo, sometimes used reinforced armored coaches. Native American encounters represent one of the most glaring distortions in Hollywood storytelling. Films often show constant savage attacks from hostile tribes. Yes, attacks did occur and could be terrifying, but the reasons were often complex. Some were attempts to seize horses or supplies, resist encroachment, retaliate against violence, or secure vital resources. Most losses were in livestock and goods, not human lives. Moreover, many of these encounters were exaggerated or falsely blamed on Native groups. In some cases, white criminals disguised themselves as Native Americans to sow fear or shift blame. While fear was genuine, it's important to understand the broader historical context of land dispossession, far removed from Hollywood's oversimplified, savage Indian cliches.
Chapter 7. The Human Element. Passengers and Crew. The human element, passenger mindset, social dynamics, and crew experiences, was central to the harsh truth of stagecoach travel. For passengers, the mental and emotional strain was immense. Constant anxiety, numbing boredom, and deep exhaustion. The looming threat of danger was ever present. Moments of sheer terror alternated with long stretches of tedious monotony. Over it all hung a blanket of fatigue, brought on by non-stop travel, sleepless nights, bad food, and overwhelming stress.
Cramped quarters and forced closeness bred tension. Stage lines like Wells Fargo even issued behavioral rules. Share your liquor, spit downwind, don't snore on fellow riders, treat women respectfully, and stay composed during runaways. They also discouraged discussing politics or religion, using foul language, or pointing out previous ambush sites. Clear signs that disorder was always a risk. Drivers, known as whips, were admired for their mastery over horse teams on treacherous terrain. Yet their job came with relentless danger, grueling hours, and generally poor pay. Shotgun messengers, tasked with guarding high-value freight, lived under constant threat. They were typically the first targets in any attack, bearing huge risks for little compensation. Stagecoach passengers came from all walks of life: soldiers, priests, academics, laborers, aristocrats. While carrying mail and money was the primary mission of stage lines, passengers were an important revenue bonus. People boarded coaches for business, to relocate, to seek health remedies, or simply for the spirit of adventure. But the stagecoach journey in 19th century America remains a vivid example of the gap between romantic myth and gritty historical truth. Hollywood gave us a thrilling fantasy. History shows us an ordeal, unrelentingly brutal, deeply uncomfortable, dangerous, and shockingly unsanitary. The real story is one of raw human resilience. Passengers and crew endured the unthinkable. The level of endurance required makes the westward push all the more awe-inspiring. Grasping these real hardships allows for a deeper, more honest appreciation of the past. And the unvarnished truth offers a richer, more powerful story than any polished myth. The enduring grip of the Hollywood myth is a testament to the power of film, but confronting the raw truth offers a much deeper insight into the sheer grit or pressing necessity that led people to endure such punishing travel. Choosing to ride a stagecoach wasn't just a decision, it was often a reflection of powerful motivators: the pursuit of a better future, obligation, the hope for fortune, or simply having no other option. It turns the passengers and crew into true symbols of human resilience. The authentic Wild West, viewed from within a jolting, cramped, and hazardous stagecoach, was far rougher and far more unforgiving than anything a movie could hope to portray. So what shocked you most about the harsh reality of stagecoach travel? Was it the tight quarters, the dreadful roads, the ever-present disease, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this glimpse into the real Old West eye-opening, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more no-nonsense history. Thanks for watching. That's all, folks. Until next time.